I've been in office for a little over 100 days. I will tell you there's been no shortage of challenges, no shortage of things to do. And I want to stand before you and tell you how excited, genuinely excited I am about our future. Because sometimes that doesn't come through because we focus on the short term, we focus on the challenges, the things that might divide us. But I know that our best days are ahead, but we do have some work to do in the meantime. I'm committed to doing it, and I'm going to ask you to partner with us to make sure that it gets done. So share my optimism, share my enthusiasm, be bullish on our future like I am, but in the meantime, in the short term, share my resolve to fix our problems. And there are no easy answers. We didn't get into this shape overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. And hard decisions have to be made. The simple fact of the matter is when you inherit the largest budget deficit in the history of our state, in the current year, it exceeded $900 million just to close the books June 30th. For the year starting July 1st, it was exceeded $2 billion. There's only one way to deal with that and live up to your constitutional obligation to balance the budget. You either increase revenues, you cut expenditures, or you do a combination of the both. Now, there's not an easy answer there. There's not a real painless way to do it. I opted for a balanced approach of both of those things. I think that's the way to go. But there are some folks who never want to raise revenue, and they're not happy. And there's some folks who never want to cut a program, and they're not happy. And I understand that. But at the end of the day, given the situation we're in, what our obligations are, if you're not willing to raise revenue and you're in the legislature, stand up and announce the cuts that you're supporting to close the gap. Nobody did that. Nobody did that. And so I just believe it takes a balanced approach. It takes a disciplined approach. But first and foremost, we have to be willing to say how we got here. What process, what path led us to where we are? And then how are we going to move our state in a much better direction? And that's kind of what I want to lay out for you today. And I'm going to do my best to wrap up in time to leave an opportunity for questions, because I believe that that's always important. I think servant leaders have an obligation to listen and not just to talk. And so I want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions before I leave. The one thing that I am confident of, we will never fix our problems if Baton Rouge starts to look like Washington, D.C. If we ever get to a place where people stop talking to one another because they happen not to be of the same party, if they want to focus on the differences rather than on the common interest, then we're not going to be successful. And I am committed to not allowing that to happen so long as I'm your governor. And I invest every single day, hours, talking to people who are not necessarily coming to that conversation with the same frame of mind that I have as to how to fix our problems. Because if we don't engage in that conversation, we will never know what the common interest is. And we can find that common ground and start building a compromise from there. But when you stop talking, it's impossible. That's what's already happened in Washington. We cannot allow that to happen in Louisiana. And so while it may sound cliche, I think it's very important that we work as Louisianans, all of us, not just me in the legislature, but all of us. Let's be Louisianans first for a while. We can get back to being Republicans and Democrats in plenty of time before the next election. And that's going to happen. I understand that. But let's be Louisianans first, and let's fix our problems. Now, I believe we're where we are because of 8 years of a rather dishonest budgeting process where we refused to make the cuts necessary to line up with recurring expenditures. Instead, we used trust funds and fund sweeps and all sorts of gimmicks to move dollars where they weren't supposed to be in order to prop up a budget. Now, I happen to think the things we were funding were important. We just didn't fund them responsibly. And so we end up today where all of those special funds are gone. Even if Jay Darden and I wanted to, and by the way, Jay Darden is doing a great job as the Commissioner of Administration. I could not be happier with his performance. But even if we wanted to find one-time dollars and prop up the budget again, they don't exist. And so that is why we are so far out of balance. I will tell you that for years, we passed budgets that were nominally in balance. We would pray that revenue would come in ahead of expectations, and when that didn't happen, on an annual basis, we had mid-year budget cuts, and we just destabilized the state over and over and over again. But that game is up. And as nasty as the budget was, because the budget that I presented to the legislature this year is not the budget that I want to actually implement come July 1st, because the cuts are too drastic across too great of an area of our state. Things that we would all consider to be priorities are not adequately funded. But at least in that budget, there's not a single fund sweep. There are no one-time dollars lined up against recurring expenditures. We don't make a raid on the Transportation Trust Fund. All of the money in the Transportation Trust Fund is going to go to roads and bridges. But that's about where the beauty of that budget ends. I'll be honest with you. After that, it gets really, really tough. But we're going to fix our problems. I'm committed to doing it. But if we don't talk about them in an honest way, in a forthright way, we're never going to fix it. And I will tell you that it's not easy. This is not what I wanted to do as your governor, is to come into office and talk about how we deal with a $2 billion shortfall. There's a whole lot more fun things that I can do. I was meeting with a group of legislators for breakfast this morning, and they were really upset because of the approach I'm taking on capital outlay. And they said, well, we need to be able to bring those projects home. And I said, well, we need to be able to pay for them. And if we can't pay for them, it doesn't do anybody any good to put those projects in the capital outlay program. And so I would much rather be in a different position. I would much rather be in a position of working with legislators to do all of those things. But the simple fact of the matter is that's not where we are today. But we are going to get on top of things, and we're going to fix it. Now, the good news is, for the current year, we're going to end on June 30th, having made some very painful cuts, but not draconian cuts. And that's because we did a lot of good work in that first special session that we had. Now, since I've been governor, we've cut over $230 million state general fund out of the current year. So don't believe that we're fixing all of our problems just by raising revenue. That is not the case. It is a balanced approach. Now, for next year, there is a deficit that remains at $600 million. Now, that deficit would exceed $750 million, except for the Medicaid expansion is going to save us $180 million in the first year. And so we've got that number down to $600 million. But that $600 million shortfall means that we're $183 million from paying for TOPS. We are $46 million from keeping our funding for higher education where it was in the current year. We're $50 million short on our K through 12 schools, just trying to keep them even what they were in the current year. We're $70 million from funding 4 safety net hospitals that, as of today, are not in the budget at all. We are struggling to house inmates. We're struggling to take care of juvenile justice. We've got a Department of Children and Family Services where the caseworker on average has 2 times as many children to look after than is best practices. Those are kids that are in the state's custody. I will tell you that I wake up in the middle of the night worried, are we doing right by the people of Louisiana when we are investing or not investing in those critical services? I'm convinced that we can do better. We are going to do better. But the first thing we have to do is stabilize our state and stop these annual cuts, and let's get to a place where we are adequately funding our government, and then within our means, strategically reinvest over time so that we strengthen the institutions that afford more opportunity. Principally among them, higher education. And I see a lot of higher education people here today. I ran for governor for a lot of reasons, but chief among them is this one. And I know I've shared this with Richard before, and Richard, you may be tired of hearing it. But if we have young people in our state who decide that they want to leave in order to pursue some educational opportunity to get a good job or have a rewarding career, we should wish them well and pray for their success. But if we have kids in Louisiana who are deciding they have to leave our state in order to get a good education or to find a good job or have a rewarding career, we are failing those kids. I believe we are failing too many kids today, And if we stay on this road, we're going to fail too many more in the future. And quite frankly, we don't have a margin for error in Louisiana where we can afford that. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to work together and fund what we all believe to be critical priorities. And I would just ask that you work with me and my administration to make that happen. Now, with respect to infrastructure, I told you that the Transportation Trust Fund in our budget is not going to be swept. That's going to leave $60 million more to pay for roads and bridges and ports than was the case in the current year. Because when people fill up their car with gas or their truck with diesel and they pay that tax, that's what they're expecting will happen with that money. And I think long before we can ask the people of Louisiana to pay more gas tax for transportation projects, we got to spend the current gas tax we are receiving on transportation projects. I think that is a central precursor to being able to be successful to invest more in transportation. But that doesn't mean we're not going to invest more in transportation in the meantime. I've taken an additional 25% of the capital outlay program, which is very broken too, and dedicated that to transportation projects. That's going to be an additional $75 million in the first year alone. The other thing I want you to know that I'm working on, I happen to believe that it's important for me to be a good partner with local government, and I think I need to try to be a good partner with the federal government. I have had opportunities in just a little over 100 days to meet with the president twice, the vice president twice, and the secretary of transportation twice. And I want you to know, every time I've met with them, I've asked for $100 million, which we have actually formally applied for now, for a grant. It's a discretionary competitive grant in order to free up the movement of commerce and freight along critical interstate systems. Well, there's no place in this nation where that's needed more than right here in Baton Rouge. And I believe we're going to be successful. And I don't know if we'll get 100 million, but I can tell you we look to get at least 60. And when we do that, we're going to free up money that we're going to come and we're going to fix this Washington Street exit problem here in Baton Rouge so that people... And we're going to do that simply by establishing a relationship and communicating our needs and demonstrating that what we have in Louisiana meets the requirements of the FAST Act that's in that transportation bill that was recently passed. And I believe we're going to be successful. And we're going to apply again next year and the year after and the year after that. I believe in making sure that we get the benefit of our tax dollars. And in fact, I don't know of a more conservative notion out there than making sure that your tax dollars are working for you, instead of sending them to Washington and allowing them to go to other states and let them work for those people. And which brings me back to the Medicaid expansion. For several years now, we've been sending tax dollars to Washington that are designed to come back here and pay for health care coverage for working people in Louisiana, but instead that money's been sent to 30 other states so that their working poor have health care coverage, so that the reimbursement dollars go to their providers, so that their employers have a healthier, more productive workforce, while Louisiana goes without. That didn't make sense to me. And I believe it's the right thing to do for every reason, to make sure that we bring those dollars back here, take care of the people in Louisiana, and in the process, save $180 million in the first year. And not only are we going to save that money in the first year, we're going to avoid cost increases in the future, because we know that DISH dollars, that's how we primarily pay for uninsured care at our safety net hospital system, they're going to be reduced by 75% or up to 75% by 2020. So if we don't accept the Medicaid expansion today to pay for the health care for the uninsured, and we lose the DISH dollars in the future, we have no way to pay for health care in Louisiana to people that are going to be able to access the care because of the EMTALA laws, but we don't have any way to pay for it. So all of those providers are going to be dispensing care without reimbursement. They can only do that for so long before they close their doors. And if you think that's an imaginary threat, look at Baton Rouge General Mid-City Campus today. So for all of those reasons, the Medicaid expansion was the right thing to do. And I will tell you, I did it on the first full day in office, and it will be the easiest big decision that I ever make as governor. Because when a hospital closes, it doesn't just close for the poor or the uninsured or the Medicaid population. It closes for everyone. And none of us can afford that. And if you think that that's an idle threat, I would ask you to look at a map of the United States and look at rural hospital closures, and then overlay that map with one showing the states that accepted the Medicaid expansion and those that did not, and look at the correlation. So it's the right thing to do. I am not going to be bashful about asking the federal government for our share of our tax dollars back to take care of the people in Louisiana, especially in current situation like we have, where we are struggling to have the means necessary at the state level to provide for our people. So that's the situation that we're in. We are going to fix it. We're going to put ourselves on a path to a more prosperous future. And we cannot be in the business of guaranteeing equality of outcomes, but we better get back in the business of guaranteeing equality of opportunity. And that means, and I'll say this because Richard's here with me, that means at a bare minimum, we've got to start increasing our state general fund support for higher education. For 8 years, the state of Louisiana led the nation in terms of cuts to higher education, and led the nation in terms of increases in tuition and fees. We cannot stay on that road. And for those of you who think that we're relatively okay, I want to assure you we're not. But second off, we're losing ground to other states. The Lumina Foundation came in Friday, Richard, and we spent 2 hours talking. We are losing ground to our sister states in terms of the number of people who have some post-secondary education, especially those 4-year degrees. And while we need educated, skilled workers from technical colleges in order to fill jobs that are created, you've got to have the 4-year degrees in order to create jobs. That's where we are falling behind our partners. And the only way to fix this is to increase our state general fund support for higher education. I am committed to doing that. That's why it pains me to submit a budget that is $46 million short of offering the same level of services at our universities in next year than what we're doing this year. We clearly have to do better, but we will. I am optimistic, I am excited, but it's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's going to take people who are willing to sit down and talk to one another, and we're going to get that done.